Warning, this episode contains strong language or mature themes. Parental discretion is advised. Welcome to this podcast is Uncalled For. On today's edition, Chris Hurt. And now, your host for this podcast, Mike Chernevsky.
Improv. It is the jazz music of the acting world. Something that I include in almost all of my film projects. It could be as simple as a couple of lines. It could be something as complex as entire scenes. Improv, among other things, allows an actor to more fully explore his or her character in ways that the writer and the director probably never thought of. It's a powerful tool for actors. I strongly suggest it for any actors who happen to be listening. And improv is how I met today's guest. Now, today's guest as well, we have the added bonus of being able to talk about geek culture. And that's going to be an interesting conversation for everyone. So please welcome Chris Hurt to the podcast. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mike.
So let's talk about improv.
Well, you and I both started in improv around the same time, somewhere around 2002, 2003, if I remember correctly.
2004.
Really? Okay. We were part of an improv troupe at Johnson County Community College. Mm-hmm. Don Turley was the creative director of that improv troupe, eventually handing the creative director part over to our mutual friend John Brown, who tragically passed away from melanoma in 2013.
John was a good guy, and his restaurant's still open at Crown Center, the Zateca.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I make it a point to eat there every time I'm at Crown Center.
Crown Center is a wonderful place. Mm-hmm. There's also an improv festival that happens down there. For some reason, I'm always too busy, or I either find myself with too little time or too little money in order to participate. Just comes down to not making it a priority.
Yeah.
That's a problem for all of us. Our beginnings in improv, though, Denton was trying to go more towards the dramatic. He had some experience with short form or comedic improv. Basically, the difference between short form and long form is duration. Mm-hmm. Short form tends to be what you call short form games, which are either meant as warm-up exercises for those of us in workshop or for the opening show, and it really brings the audience into the performance. Mm-hmm. Long form, you're improvising a one-act play. One of the formats is called the Herald. You would have a few short scenes, perhaps an intermission, and you might come back and finish the story you're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a good example of short form improv, check out Whose Line Is It Anyway? Because that's pretty much what it is these short improv games, and they are comedic in nature. And I know we both had experience working with each other on both those forms that you talked about. So short form more with the group, and long form one of my early attempts at filmmaking. So let's talk more. Let's start with the short form stuff. I seem to recall a couple of very funny little bits we came up with as a group. A, for example.
Please keep in mind it has been about 15 years.
Yes.
My memory is not too good on that, and personally, I haven't done much improv in the last 5 to 6 years. But this is when I met you, and so it's a time that I like to look back upon, especially whenever you and I speak. A lot of the, some short-form games are also used for actors for warm-ups, because in tapping into improv, you're tapping into a different part of your brain. As far as a short-form game goes, the first one that comes to mind is the alphabet game. What you're trying to do, usually you're trying to work with at least one other person, and whatever you're performing, you call it a scene, and whoever you're in the scene with is your scene partner. If you're improvising with just one other person, in the alphabet game, for instance, we're going to try and play this if that's fine.
All right.
The alphabet game, you're just trying to start a sentence with the next letter in the alphabet. The part that's interactive with the audience is you ask the audience for a letter to start with, and of course you're trying to go in sequence. Now, there's some leadway as far as when you're talking about what letter a word starts with. Anything like expert or expertise along those lines, you're going to say, okay, we're going to give you some leadway, and that's a word that starts with X, because there's only so many of them, and you're not always going to start a sentence with xylophone. Let's be honest. Or Zyrtec. Oh, see, that one's a Z. But I'm looking here for a letter, but the first letter that comes to my mind is probably going to be O. So, O, it's good to see you, Mike.
Plenty good to see you too, Chris.
Query, what time did you wake up this morning?
Really, it was about 7.
So, very early.
True.
You've been at this a while then today.
Very much so.
We'll go ahead and say that I haven't.
Xavier would agree with you.
He's a good man.
Zoology is his hobby.
Amen to that.
But I gotta say, it's not really something I get too excited about, but each his own.
Certainly. Xavier and zoology, they just go together.
Did you get a chance to look at the skyline today? It looks pretty darn good.
Every day I tend to pass these buildings, and I'm looking through the window here, and I'm thinking that I might actually be downtown Kansas City, Missouri, rather than downtown Oakland Park.
For sure, I actually like the changes. It feels like an actual downtown now. So.
Goodness. They are very busy with changing the very nature of this intersection as we know it.
Happy to agree with you, and there are some positives and negatives. Again, I like the downtown feel that these new buildings are bringing, and the fact that they're replacing basically derelicts, bringing new life to downtown, and actually excited to see how it all turns out.
I'm very happy that they have opened a museum to appreciate the heritage, although it only may go back about 60 years, and have made better use of that building.
Just sounds awesome.
Kansas City is a wonderful place.
Let's just say that it's home. It always has been. It always will be, and that's what makes it special for me.
Missouri, it should be noted, is actually where Kansas City started proper. Kansas City, Kansas later decided to unify and call themselves Kansas City, Kansas. And a little bit more obscure fact, they decided to unify their city government and county government. And it's always fun, they'll go ahead and call it the unified government in the local press.
No doubt.
And when you come back, sometimes you can repeat the letter O in this case. And of course, You have you, and you have I. You certainly have O, which is nice as an interjection. You probably go back through and look at this as a transcript. I don't know if you do that. But a lot of these sentences have started with adverbs. I know I remember starting my sentence with certainly, one of them. But that is an example of a game. Not all of these short form games are as dependent on a vocal element. In fact, a good way to warm up, and certainly in workshop, is working through a scene where you can only use body language or gestures to communicate. Although no one's suggesting that that has to be as formalized as pantomime.
Now, long form, let's talk long form for a little bit. I've come to like and appreciate long form, particularly when I'm doing my film production. And one of the early examples of this was a scene that we did at the laundromat not too far from here.
Please remind me of the time frame.
This has been 2004.
Oh yes, for one of your short forms, paying tribute to many of the works of Kevin Smith.
Yes. Yeah. And we were at the laundromat. You and Bernice was the actress's name. And I would later, transcribe and recycle this for another attempt at this film, which actually got done, but wasn't able to edit to my liking. But the one line I distinctly remember: sometimes I wonder about Holden. He's like a sponge. He just takes from people, doesn't really give back.
Thank you for putting me back into that scene.
Yeah.
That was an idea that he likes to go by his middle name, Denton, had. It was to come up with one-act plays through the use of long-form improv, transcribe them, and use them as ideas for dramatic or film productions.
Yeah.
You never know whether your long form is going to be comedic or not, and what's wonderful is that the comedy is spontaneous. If you try to force a joke, or if you try to force humor, the audience knows it. One of the other people I used to do improv with has since stopped doing improv, and unfortunately over the course of years I've lost contact with this person. But in an example of humor that just arises spontaneously, they were talking about a restaurant, and it happened to be on the moon, and she simply said that there was a lack of atmosphere. Now the coffee shop that we're at right now, there's a different atmosphere. It's a very casual, very fun atmosphere, but the fact that there's no atmosphere on the moon, again, she is fantastically talented and clever, and it didn't register with her what she had said, but the audience collectively groaned at the utterance. But it was a good groan, and there was laughter immediately afterwards. When you try to force a pun, that's something I chronically do. It's an affliction. It's a sad, terrible affliction. You take away any chance for the scene to develop. The basis for any communication or interaction with your scene partner in a long form is emotion. Just feel something and speak to what you're feeling. Listening, which is something I personally struggle with in any area. You're listening for the last part of what's being said, and you respond to the last part of what's being said. The next important part of improv is you're not trying to plan what you're going to say next. Another fun thing is when you try and pull from media whether it's a sitcom or a movie or whatever, you'll go ahead and try to put a line into a situation, and if someone recognizes it, they will call shenanigans, meaning that you've planned what you're going to say ahead of time. The purpose of short form, at least in workshop or training or practice, whatever you want to call it, is to get you to start to think quickly. A lot of these games, again, are short duration. You're trying to get your brain clicking and thinking, and of course you're also trying to, during a performance, pull the audience in, get them engaged. The Herald is just one example of a long form. There's another one that comes to my mind. It's called I'm forgetting the name, but it basically is you have a guest and you'll get a suggestion from the audience, and that person will tell a story. Probably no more than 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And you'll have a set of scenes inspired by that monologue. You'll come back from the end of that scene. Sometimes you might have a series of scenes, and that person will tell another story. They might come back one more time, and again, you'll have improvised an entire one-act play based on someone's suggestion and someone's story for inspiration. As far as ending scenes, which you do in improv, especially in long form, someone will either call scene, or someone will walk across the stage and break the scene, calling the scene with emotion. With emotion, not emotion, although they probably, if they wanted to. Sometimes you'll have a series of short gags, and it'll be called a run. Someone will recognize something, and someone will just come across the stage making a reference. They'll stop, another person, and that is another mechanism to transfer between scenes. A lot of this is very dry, I'll be honest. However, the bagels here are wonderful. Improv, unfortunately, again, has been something that I haven't done in a few years. I need to get back into it, and I have a changing work schedule coming up. I might be able to look at available training through the Kansas City Improv Company. Possibly anyone familiar with Westport knows about the Westport Coffee House. Behind the Westport Coffee House is a theater, and they sell tickets to this theater at the Westport Coffee House.
IFC types know about this coffee house theater because we used to hold our meetings there for years, and they let us use it for free.
It's on Pennsylvania Avenue, if I remember.
Yep.
Okay. That's like 43 something?
It is 40th in Pennsylvania.
Okay. All right. Personally, I the parking is small. I think there is a parking garage, but
There's a parking garage on one side, but I think everyone uses the parking lot there, right next to it. So.
there's a grocery store. We won't mention its name, but the Kansas City Improv Company operates in the theater in the back, and recently, when I say recently, it can mean a long span of time, but this has been within 5 to 10 years. They redid the back, and there's a restaurant there that operates. It's Green Room Burgers and Beer.
It's the Green Room Burgers and Beer. Mike Potacek, the owner, who's also the son of the folks that run the coffee shop. And that opens 2012, 2013.
That sounds right. What's fun is that you're actually able to bring your food and beverage into the theater. It wasn't always that way, but they changed that within the last couple of years, and that makes although it can be interesting trying to work with an audience that might have had a few. And a word of caution about improv in general. There are two things you don't do. You don't do improv when you're drunk. And there is another person, pretty notable in the improv community, operates out of St. Paul, in the Minneapolis area, I have to mention Jill Bernard.
Okay.
And she has a book called The Tiny Book of Improv. One of the things that's mentioned is don't become personally involved. Don't start a relationship with someone in your improv troupe. You're probably just attracted to the fact that you're in an intimate situation with that person. Improv is very intimate, and opening yourself up emotionally, showing some vulnerability, brings honesty and opens your creativity within a scene. For the many years that I worked with John Robeson, he now works out of Lawrence as far as improv goes. I'm not sure if he's working out of the Guild Theater or not out there. The last time I checked, he was. He was the creative director for a few different troupes. One of them used to operate out of Bonner Springs, and it was called the Roving Imp. And of course, that's just rearranging the words in improv, except it's improving, but improv being short for improvisation, we probably already covered that earlier, but he was always complimentary of my vulnerability, or at least my ability to tap into that, because it brings forth an honesty and authenticity. If you can tap into that, if you can just bring that out, it makes it easier, especially to respond emotionally.
Well, let's take a couple of minutes and talk about geek culture, because I think that's something we both have in common, but it's probably different types of geekdom.
Oh, yes.
Because I know for a fact that you are a brony.
That is true. That is true. For those who are not aware of this, it's been about 10 years. There was a collaboration between Hasbro Incorporated and Discovery Communications. On the 10th of October 2010, they launched a new network that used to be called Discovery Kids. It was, until 2014, it was known as The Hub. In 2014, that channel was renamed the Discovery Family Channel. They had a few different toy-driven programs. Littlest Pet Shop, I'm sorry, that came along about in 2012, 2013. Pound Puppies was one of them. Transformers Prime had 3 seasons. But of course, the show that I'm talking about is My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. This started to be created about 2 years before the start of the network, and you may not have heard of Lauren Faust, but she's now married to Craig McCracken. They worked together on the Powerpuff Girls, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. The latter of the two was primarily done in Adobe Flash animation. What's useful, as the creators of South Park will testify to, although they used Maya, I believe, is that you can build a digital library of poses and accessories and that can be reused, and thus you can speed up the animation schedule a little bit. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends operated at its production schedule was accelerated and only took about half the amount of time a traditional episode took to produce. In animation, a typical episode from when it's written to when it finally hits the air is between 9 months and a year.
Yep.
Lauren,
South Park's a good example that they turn around episodes in a week now.
at least with South Park specifically.
South Park specifically,
They're fairly unique. Lauren Faust is given executive producer credit for adapting the toy line, or at least to television. It should also be said that she actually designed the character names and the visual style, and was involved continued to be a consulting producer through most of the show's run, the show is finally in its last season, its 9th season. It's about to air episode 13, which since season 5, they've broken up into 2 halves, and they decided to start around April. Originally, the show started again in October 2010, and so they ran with a more traditional television schedule that started in fall and ended in spring. But with season 5, they went with a more of a calendar based. There was a movie in 2017, October 2017, and it was kind of, for a fan like me, it was the experience not dissimilar if I was older with the original Transformers, where your movie is in the middle and then you come back and you have the next season. Although, because it was October, there were still a few episodes left of that season to air. My curiosity with the program has primarily been because of the production and because I'm familiar with Lauren Faust's work in the past. But after a while, you get drawn in by the characters are engaging, they're in jokes, and you appreciate how complex the story might be. But like I said, after a while, within the internet subculture, there are ways that those people think about certain characters and opinions and all the kind of fun things that happen there. But bottom line is the show is just adorable, and it's very hard to ignore.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about being a geek and being involved in those different fandoms. You mentioned South Park, of course. I'm very much a South Park fan.
I believe that was Cartman.
That is Cartman, yeah.
Now, if I remember correctly, there was, during the film careers of
Trey Parker and Matt Stone.
There we go. They worked together. They went to film school together?
Yeah, they met at Colorado.
And that was where they made Cannibal the musical. There is a scene where you can hear Eric Cartman's voice. And if I remember correctly, it's actually one of the show's writers and producers. That's what he sounds like when he gets mad, which makes it all the more difficult for anyone to take him seriously. But there's another type of geek culture that's out there, far more pervasive.
Uh-huh.
You know a lot more about sports than I do.
True.
And I remember, I don't know how many different podcasts you've had, but your most recent podcast...
This is my 3rd podcast.
So your second podcast would have been Winning Side Coaches.
That is correct, and credit to you for coming up with the name.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was trying to combine two different concepts. Obviously, you have whoever is the victor in a sporting contest, the winning side, and then you have sometimes parents or informal doing some side coaching. So it was basically side being the part in the middle that works. Again, this is the way the quirky brain works, and I'll bring this back to improv for just a moment.
Sure.
Because one of the things that was told to me complimentary, one of the other people involved in that troupe, his name was Jack Shedd. He ended up moving to Chicago, has since gotten married, and I think he has a pretty successful consulting biz. And he was able to get a pretty sizable donation from the philanthropic side of a pretty major company not long ago. I'd have to look up the internet video to be sure about that. I tell you, I'm strange online, but I find it myself better when I'm able to pull stuff up. But for the sake of Mike and the sake of the podcast, I made sure that I just brought my phone to this gathering. Anyway, some people, there's an image that circulates on Facebook. A lot of people, when you have a convention, there's a few around here in the Kansas City area. You have Planet Comic-Con, and you have Nakacon. Planet Comic Con is much more general. You have people who appreciate cinema, comic books, TV shows, etc. It's not unlike the Comic Con that happens in San Diego. You have a lot of high-profile guests. Peter Mayhew recently passed away. He's been a guest a few times. About 2 years ago, you had actors from Star Trek together.
Yeah, you had all the Next Generation cast minus Sir Patrick Stewart show up. Will Wheaton has been there a couple times. The first time I went, and some of my fellow video students actually did a video about that one. George Takei was there, Adam Baldwin, the original Black Power Ranger, Lou Ferrigno, just to name a few.
Lou Ferrigno, of course, is famous for playing the Hulk.
Yep.
In was the show called The Incredible Hulk?
I believe it was. Yeah.
Okay. The 70s program where you don't want to get that guy angry.
That's
For
right.
a moment there, I'm sorry that I don't remember the actor who played the original Black Power Ranger from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which is a adaptation of the live action. A lot of the live action segments are actually from a Japanese program. I can't remember the
Super
specific.
Sentai Juranja, I believe is what it's called.
I can't remember the specific genre of television program that is either. I don't know. Again, if I had an internet reference, I would be able to dig through my material. But for a moment, I was going to make a joke about Lou Ferrigno being the original Black Power Ranger. But again, the moment is lost.
That would have been pretty funny, though. So.
That was something I was complimented on by Jack Shedd about my ability to make connections. I was very good about that. Anyway, I'm trying to bring it. I'm yammering on. And like,
that's all right.
You try and talk to me, and I forget what conversation thread I was going. Anyway, there is an image on Facebook. It was talking about there are a lot of people who dress up in costume. They costume play, also known as cosplay, for a lot of conventions, and that's sometimes looked down upon by people in mainstream culture, but the text is overlaid over an image of someone with their face painted and wearing a jersey in the stands of a football game and saying, so that's okay and this isn't. Is it fair to say that you're a bit of a sports geek as well?
I think it is, yeah.
I know that you follow a lot more the London football clubs than I do. I know I'm smart enough to, or at least recognize that football, you kick it with your foot, and therefore it's actually football.
Yeah.
What
we call soccer, they call football.
Or at least in German, it's Fußball, because the foot or feet is Fuß, and there you go. What other sports do you typically enjoy? You follow hockey, if I remember correctly?
Oh, yeah. Hockey, basketball, baseball, American football.
Now, American football, there's a topic of controversy for you, especially since the Rams, they went back to St. Louis in 2014.
It was after the 2015 season.
Okay.
When that happened.
Yeah.
And I'm still angry about that.
Okay. Yeah, pretty good. Yeah.
And basically, the Super Bowl has basically come down to possibly seeing a few good commercials in between seeing the Patriots win.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad because it denied that particular team from fully capitalizing on, excuse my language here, fucking over a good sports town like St. Louis.
Oh, yes.
I did not watch that Super Bowl for that reason. And it got to the point that I'm less interested in football on the field and more interested in the lawsuits.
Oh, wow.
From that, yeah.
So have you become a bit of a legal geek in that area?
I've always been a bit of a legal geek. One of the things having gotten my degree in business, one of the things we had to learn was about law. And not a lawyer, but we did have to take law classes. And one last bit of geekdom that I want to talk about before we wrap things up. Trekkie geekdom.
Well,
Yeah.
it's been a few decades. They've called themselves Trekkers. I haven't seen a lot of the original series.
I've seen all of it.
Within Trekker culture, you'll typically call any of the Star Trek series by initials.
Yes, it's a TOS for the original series, TNG for Next Generation, DS9, D61. I think it's a VOY for Voyager,
Or simply V'ger, the same as the same as the character from Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Right.
What do they call Enterprise for short?
ENT, I believe.
Okay.
And then we have TAS, that's the animated series. We're recording this. They just wrapped up season 2 of Discovery, which
Available through CBS's streaming.
they're all available through CBS streaming.
Because CBS owns the rights.
CBS owns the rights to all Star Trek except for the movies.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Of course, it should be said that.
Don't get me started on JJ Trek. I refuse. That's the one
no.
part of Trek I refuse to
only,
watch.
I'm only trying to talk about the ownership corporately.
Yeah.
CBS is still owned by Viacom.
No, CBS and Viacom split up. Viacom kept the movies. CBS kept all TV Trek.
Oh.
And
Rights management is another fun area of legal tangling. The films, of which there were 9?
there are
Sorry.
10. 6 TOS, 4 TNG.
Oh yes, that's right. Before you were disregarding the Kelvin timeline and Abrams. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I should know that. I forgot where I was going with this, but anyway, Paramount is the studio
Paramount is owned by Viacom,
which owns the cinematic rights,
yes.
or at least the rights to the movies. That's what I was trying to get at. They were once one happy company. Again, you go back and you look at the original series. Thank goodness for Desilu Productions. That would not be.
Yep.
That would not have happened without them. Gene Roddenberry passed away in 1991.
True. His son's running things now, so Rod Roddenberry.
It's important to say that again, the original series was a primetime television series. Ran for 2.5 years, 3 seasons.
3 seasons.
3 seasons, 2.5 years, between '66 and 1969.
True.
The Star Trek: The Next Generation, again, was on CBS as a primetime show until it went to syndication.
It actually was syndicated throughout. So, I don't think it was ever a network show. I think it was entirely syndicated.
Okay.
So,
The
the same is true of DS9. Voyager kicked off the UPN network.
That's right, the United Paramount Network, which
No longer exists.
well, it ended up merging with the WB network to become CW Columbia Warner.
Yep.
So you had a lot of local television stations like here that were. This was in the 90s, into the early part of the last decade, the middle part of the last decade. You had the United Paramount Network, you had Warner Brothers, and of course you had Fox, but Fox has been around for 30 years. In fact, bringing it back to being a flagship, pardon the expression, and perhaps the pun, Star Trek Discovery has caused many people to take notice of Star Trek again.
One thing I see a lot among detractors of Discovery, they'll call it STD instead of DIS or DSC.
Star Trek Discovery, but I think a lot of people just call it Discovery, don't they, or do they?
Yeah, Discovery or Disco is appropriate too.
There you go. We love to shorten things in the geek culture.
But yeah, among detractors it's STD. They just wrapped up season 2 of Discovery, which was amazing, and they're getting ready to do the Picard series.
Oh yes, that premiered this last week.
Yeah, they just did a trailer this past week. Yeah,
that is bringing back a lot of people into it. Whether or not it's still some discussion. From a fictional standpoint, you're still looking at where that fits in the overall. Because timelines are very important. You can talk about what happens with other characters and what causes certain things.
I think it's part of the reason that people detracted from Discovery, because it's supposed to be pre-TOS, all right, like 10 years before the original series. And And
But the lighting, the storytelling...
everything's radically different in 2019 as opposed to the 60s.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, as you do.
Just either because of storytelling, visual effects, or, again, the visual storytelling itself.
I think it's more the visual storytelling than anything, but all things considered, I think they did a good job, especially with season 2 and that how they incorporated some of those original characters. I mean, they had Christopher Pike running Discovery in that second season.
Which, of course...
Roddenberry's original.
Yes, he was... He was the character that originally landed on the planet in the pilot.
Yeah, Talos 4. Yeah, he was the original captain, and there's some legal stuff, but eventually that character got replaced by James D. Kirk. And then Roddenberry recycled that pilot in the only two-parter of TOS, and they couldn't get Jeffrey Hunter to reprise Pike, so they bring in another actor and put him in the wheelchair. Beat once for yes, twice for no.
So, the scenes that were originally shot for the original pilot that didn't star William Shatner,
That's right.
were recycled in that episode. What was the name of that episode?
The Menagerie.
Thank you. And those are the kind of things that you commit to memory being a geek. You know these kind of things.
Exactly.
What was the record of the Rams last season?
I don't know because I haven't been paying attention.
There you go.
Yeah. But what's interesting about Discovery? Yeah, they did an excellent job with their cast of Pike. Who, by the way, that actor is also a podcaster.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. So shameless plug for the Well Pod. The Well is the name of the podcast.
Oh, very nice.
And I think their best episode, they got drunk. So,
Well,
and they did a nice job recasting Spock as well.
Rainn Wilson also makes an appearance as a character
Yeah, he played Harry Mudd
in the
in Discovery. So this was another TOS character that got repurposed and expanded upon. And he did his take on Mudd is way more dangerous than the original.
sinister
Mudd.
and serious.
Oh yeah.
The
Whereas originally Mudd was more of a comedic character. And you see that with Pike as well. So Pike in the original pilot was very serious, very doubting himself, wanting to leave Starfleet. Completes 180 from how he's depicted in Discovery.
that's the other thing is that Star Trek did have even initially, Star Trek tends to be a bit on the dramatic side.
Yeah, that has his comedic modes.
Now, I won't mention the director, but again, I'll just refer to it as the Kelvin timeline. I can see you wincing a little bit, but in 2009, when that series of films was released, there was a piece, I believe, in The Onion, and it had some fake reactions from traditional Star Trek fans. And one of the things that was said was that there was no meeting at a very long table, no committee sessions in that movie. That's what was truly missing.
Yep, that's definitely a defining characteristic of TV Trek. It's like I want to say 10 to 20% of classic Trek is them meeting around a conference table or something.
Especially in the ready room in Next Generation.
Yeah.
Whether it's discussing the fact that continued use of warp travel is destroying subspace and will eventually make it impossible to travel large distances at the high rate of speed. What's interesting about, now we're going to really break into geek culture here, we're going to get down into some things about warp. What's interesting is that scientists have said, or at least, pardon me, as a concept, it's possible because you're folding the space or compressing the space in front of you. What's interesting is that they never actually break the speed of light. It's just because they're folding space that they appear to be traveling faster than the speed of light. Because you're making a subspace field a warp bubble that you're actually traveling in.
True.
And because you're inside of a singularity, the laws of physics are altered. But because you're actually folding and bending space, time dilation doesn't happen. And you're still at the same time frame as the rest of space around you. That's how they can tell how long they're going to be between systems, and they're still at the same time frame. You won't have the thing about twins being one being on Earth and one being in a rocket.
Right.
And the fact that you will have aged at a different rate in the spacecraft as opposed to being on the surface of the planet. What some detraction from Discovery has been, perhaps from the dramatic side, I have to say Abrams' use of lens flare. It's pretty, but boy, the sure is blinding after a while. Is that again? They've tried to set this 10 years before the original series, which is the mid 23rd century, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
From what Captain Kirk was telling the other character in Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, which is a feature whose success financially is what really made the Next Generation possible.
True.
And I'm quoting that from at least one source on YouTube. But from a fictional standpoint, from a fan standpoint, you're familiar with characters, you're familiar with concepts, you're familiar with cultures and races within the Star Trek series, and you're saying, well, how is this going to work? I don't see how this fits into the original timeline. There is one theory about the Enterprise and the fact Roddenberry's design for these ships were meant to be deep space vessels.
Yep.
It's kind of like the difference between when naval vessels ran on diesel and when they started to be powered by nuclear reactors. Again, another plot point from The Voyage Home.
They found the nuclear vessels, Captain.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they were meant to be deep space vessels, and so they're away for a long time. Anyway, the imaging system on the Enterprise, they're not just the flat screens that we know, they're actually three-dimensional projectors. And when the alien creatures would appear on the main screen, or they have the viewers in the room, you're getting a live holographic representation of that whatever space is being shown on the screen. And an existing theory as far as Discovery and the Enterprise that we know it in the original series is the fact that the Enterprise has this technology, and apparently it's such a drain on resources that and because it's a deep space vessel, it's a long time before it can be retrofit to look like the Discovery. And because this technology is
So I can actually address that, having seen Discovery.
Okay, tell me about this.
Captain Pike wanted to get rid of the holographic stuff because she felt, I'm talking to ghosts. And the Enterprise spends most of season 2 of Discovery in dry dock. All right, so that's why Pike took over Discovery.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But there you go. These are the kinds of discussions we have. Fortunately, we're both fairly level-headed people.
Yeah.
Again, we're looking at each other in the eye. We're not going to say anything derogatory to the other person. And, of course, neither of us is drunk.
That's right.
Both these things help. Go ahead.
Yep. By the way, that long form improv that Chris was talking about, so they can remember the name of. He remembered it shortly after we stopped recording. It was Armando is the name of the exercise. So, here's how you can help the podcast out. Tell your friends about it. Subscribe to the podcast. Check out our blog, uncalledfor.home.blog. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/uncalledforpodcast. And if you want to support the podcast financially, for just $5, I will mention your name on this podcast. Go to patreon.com/Mike Chernevsky, patreon.com/MikeCzerniewski. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you next time.
This podcast is Uncalled For is hosted, produced, and edited by Mike Chernevsky. Opening music is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Outro music is Ultra Lounge by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Additional music included Morocco Sting by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. And Secret of Tiki Island by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. If you would like to support this podcast or any of Mike's other creative endeavors, please consider making a donation at patreon.com/Mike Chernevsky. That's MikeCzerniewski. Donations over $5 will receive a special thanks on a future podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.